there's a lot of different views on, I guess, the idea of the state, and even people I've talked to, there's a lot of people that would consider themselves on the libertarian spectrum, but they would definitely believe in some form of maybe loose state, or there's some people that there's a lot of different views, but it's quite interesting actually to hear both of you guys' opinions on the state being almost in conflict with Jesus' position as ruler. So I guess the first question that arises from that is, um, when people maybe hear that, things like, for example, if you say the minimum wage fundamentally doesn't help people the way you might think it does, or things along those lines of maybe saying that government programs or government systems aren't necessarily serving people the way that you think they are. A lot of people kind of, they might sort of recoil a little bit and kind of think that you're having a go at these systems that are designed to help the poor, and minimum wage is designed to help poor people, and how could you be so heartless to say this is helping so many people? Or if you say equality laws that are anything, you could name kind of any part of the government really that is designed maybe with good intentions, but how do you then get around this idea that people think that it's in some way not compassionate or insensitive to maybe suggest these things are not as good as they may think? Because naturally people will think, well, they're there for a good reason, so of course they are good. So maybe Norman, if you could talk a little bit about that. Is that a stumbling block you find for some people, or what would be your way of maybe convincing people or working around that point of view?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the first thing you kind of asked, you're sort of referring to there, is the way in which the ascribed policy actually has the result that is intended. And so what we learn from economic analysis is that a lot of these policies that are set forth in order to try and accomplish a specific goal, especially if it goes against what would be, essentially good economic theory, they're going to, they not only will sometimes not have the intended effect, they can actually sometimes have the exact opposite effect. And the minimum wage is one of those that actually does have kind of the opposite effect of what is intended. The thought process is, oh, well, if we just raise the minimum wage, then we can bring people out of poverty. But the problem is that if you do that, you will crowd out people who do not have the capacity to work themselves into like their marginal revenue product, what they can command wage-wise on the free market. They may not be able to get a job at all, because suddenly, if for instance, suddenly the minimum wage goes up to 50 pounds an hour or something to that effect, well, suddenly the person, the restaurant or the grocery store or whoever that was previously able to hire 2 people at 25 or something to that effect, now they are forced to only be able to hire 1 person in order to actually maintain profit margins at a reasonable rate,
or 2 robots.
Yeah,
that's the way things are going.
And that's the other
money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah. So what a entrepreneur is seeking to do is to allocate the capital resources that they have in order to derive some measure of profit from them at a risk. Now, what's great is that these entrepreneurs actually are taking on the risk in a way that does not get passed along to the wage earner in the same way. And in fact, that's the whole point of these sort of employee-employer relationships there, is that the employer is actually taking on risk in a way that the employee does not. And that's actually a very underappreciated point by a lot of people, especially in the government, who think that somehow that the exaction of labor is what is deriving value, and that is false. That is a mistaken part of economic theory, and it's something that even Adam Smith didn't quite get right, but that later on the Austrian school did, with the introduction of the subjective theory of value. That value is not derived by just the exaction of labor, but rather by what other people are willing to exchange for it, and therefore that measurement is subjective. And so the entrepreneur is subjectively going out, making an assessment about what is going on in the economy, so that they can allocate resources in order to do something that derives profit. And they're going to do that by trying to exchange with others. So they assess what people are going to be willing to pay for and what they won't.
Mm-hmm.
Then they take on the risk of paying people in advance for the value that they can put forward through their own labor, and in order to try and do that. So in fact, by mandating an increase in the amount that it must be paid for that labor, you end up actually crowding out the other people who may have otherwise been able to participate in that activity, but now cannot. So this makes people like teenagers, for instance, are not particularly employable in high wage positions.
Right.
So they don't have the opportunity to go learn how to work hard and do good things in order to better themselves in the process. It means that people who are not as well skilled, immigrants, for instance, are not going to be able to get as easily get jobs or whatnot. People who just are not very well skilled will not be able to have the opportunity to improve themselves over time through low paying necessarily positions. It's not a crime to not be paid at a CEO level. That's I mean that's the way we all start off. We all start off down there.
Yeah, and by nature, these relationships between people are voluntary. You know, when you think about it, say there was no minimum wage and someone was offering, I don't know, $3 an hour for you to work. There's nothing saying that you have to take that position. Therefore, you can then sort of, an employer will soon find out that no one wants to work at that rate. So therefore, they're going to have to bump up the thing, or else maybe rethink their whole business plan if there's no way they can get people at that rate. So I guess people underestimate the fact that people have brains and are able to evaluate whether it's a good deal or a bad deal without whether there is a federal minimum wage or not, or a legal minimum wage.
Yeah, good observation there. And in fact, we could derive from that on some level that the minimum wage is very paternalistic in nature. It's telling the government is basically saying, nah, you don't have the ability to go out and command the wages in your own way, either through negotiation or through or through your own betterment, self betterment. And if you, why should you, not be able to go and do that? So in other words, the government's taking upon itself the role of in a paternalistic role, to force people to act in a way that they would prefer.
Yeah, to be fair to the people who are like trying to be paternalistic, because I agree with everything that Norman said. In their defense, what they'll say is like there's power differentials between employer and the lone person looking for a job. The problem is that let's go without a minimum wage for a second, and you said that $3 an hour. So let's just say that there are a bunch of people willing to work for $3 an hour. Well, that's not the employer setting the wage. That's the employees, the other people. Let's say there's a job that I would like to get $6 an hour, but like everybody's only paying $3, right? Well, it's not necessarily the employer's fault. It could be the fact that there's 16 other people or however many people are willing to take that job. So it's not that the employer is the villain here, if you want to call it a villain. I wouldn't want to do that, actually. That's just the first word that came to mind. It's not the employer is the villain. It's just that everybody else is involved in a way that says, $3 is all that this is going to affect.
Yeah, that's the going rate.
And on the flip side of that, let's say that the minimum wage, because here's the thing about minimum wage laws, the minimum wage is actually lower than what the average wage in most states in the United States is anyway. And states have their own minimum wage laws. So the federal minimum wage in the United States is actually much lower than I think almost every state. But on the flip side of that, you don't have to rely on that lone underprivileged, underempowered or disenfranchised employee seeking a job, because all of the other people that are skilled about as much as he or she is then are also sort of bidding up the price. So it's not just that like, oh, please give me a nice job, I'd like $6 an hour. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna give you $3. No, other people are bidding that up too. So it's not like they're just low. They're not completely unempowered, or I don't know what the word is.
Well, and think about what there are other implications of even what happens when you take the minimum wage type of law to even a more extreme. I mean, how many people do you know who've taken unpaid internships in order to gain experience and command a higher wage later?
Yeah, make the coffee and sweep the floor for a year.
Sure. Yeah, and or for instance, this happens. This doesn't happen as much in my field anymore, but you may choose to essentially be an understudy to like an engineer or some type of tradesman in order to gain valuable experience that will then be leveraged later. I've definitely done work as a consultant and whatnot that has never been paid in order to both gain experience and gain their trust for bigger things down the road. Now, if think about that for a second, if I'm able to negotiate, if I'm able to do that, if that's okay for me to be able to do, why is that not? Why then should there be any minimum wage at all for other types of work? Now, if I can choose to work for free and that's okay, why shouldn't somebody be able to choose to work for $3 an hour or $6 an hour or whatever?
That's what's really strange. It's actually okay. It's legal to work for free, but not to work for under a certain wage.
I was just about to ask: is there no waiver that you can sign to say I waive my right to a minimum wage, or is
that's part of the reason why minimum wage laws are so? I mean, I'm speaking a little tongue in cheek here, but that's why they're patently insane. I mean,